Nutbeam lived in a tiny camp in the forest back on Totter Brook. He'd built the camp 5 years ago on somebody's land. He didn't know there was the lumber section of the old abandoned Greg Allen farm, and none of the locals, as of yet, had located him. A couple of hunters came close a couple of times, but that was all. Although Nutbeam could not read or write, he was not uneducated. He knew all there was to know about living in the woods. He was an expert trapper, hunter, fisherman, and axeman. He knew every shrub, weed, wildflower, fern, berry, cherry, mushroom, and nut, which ones were edible and which ones were not. He was an expert in a canoe and on a pair of snowshoes. He had gathered his knowledge from experience, mostly in the last 5 years. Nutbeam was 6 feet 6 inches tall and had a 32-inch waist, with a nose 4 inches long, big negroid lips, and ears the size of dessert plates. Nutbeam was, indeed, homelier than Shirley Ramsay. Although Nutbeam was independent, he was completely without confidence. His appearance was the reason for it. His appearance and the fact that nobody normal could face him without laughing. His appearance was also the reason he had never gone to school, never liked the people, and had left his home in Smyrna, Maine to journey into Canada's Dungarvon country. Although Nutbeam didn't like people, he wasn't necessarily uninterested in them. He liked to look at people, but he didn't want people to look at him. Nutbeam kept his distance from people, ran into the woods when he saw someone coming, hid behind his hood or collar when it was absolutely necessary to pass near someone. Nutbeam sat in front of his camp, eyeing the treetops adorned by the setting sun. He watched a mosquito feasting off the back of his hand. "Gorge yourself, and then you die," he said to the mosquito. "That's about all there is to life," he thought. "A man ain't no different than a mosquito. You're born, you eat, you drink, you dump it out again, and then you die. If you're born ugly or not too smart, you might as well have your dump right away, die and get it over with. You little mosquito are probably pretty for a mosquito," said Nutbeam, and commenced to hold his breath. In a few seconds, the capillary the mosquito was tapping tightened around its tiny proboscis, trapping it so Nutbeam could reach out at his leader, slap, pick it off, or set it free. The mosquito's fate depended on Nutbeam's decision. Nutbeam's decision came with a sigh. He took a breath, a sigh. The mosquito filled his tank and flew off. "It'll die soon enough," Nutbeam thought, and scratched the itch. Nutbeam's first year on Totter Brook had been a difficult one. He nearly froze to death. Without the few rabbits he managed to snare, he would have starved. On several occasions he came very close to seeking help from the Brennen Siding dwellers. "I'm sure glad I didn't have to do that," he thought. "I'm all right now. I don't need nobody now." He remembered that he had frozen his massive ears so many times, to such an extent that he had flopped over and stayed that way. The experience turned out to be a beneficial one, however. "He can hear better with big floppy ears," mumbled Nutbeam. Nutbeam could hear a bird singing for a country mile. Nutbeam could hear a deer walking 100 yards away. He could hear the mosquitoes humming outside his camp at night. Nutbeam had no difficulty hearing Lyndon Tucker's radio and frequently stood outside Lyndon Tucker's house on Saturday nights, listening to the Kid Baker singing. Nutbeam recalled the night Lyndon had taken an early break to see a man about a horse. Nutbeam had been standing in the shadows of a shed listening to Lee Moore sing "The Cat Came Back." "Lyndon didn't see me there in the dark, but he pissed all over me boot," thought Nutbeam. As he learned and practiced the art of survival, life grew continually easier. He began taking the train into Newcastle once a month, at the risk of being seen, to trade his furs. At first he traded for traps and snares. Later he traded for food and ammunition, fishing tackle, aspirins, and candy. Later still, he traded for boots, a wonderful parka with the big hood that protected his ears and hid his face whenever he looked down. Last winter, Nutbeam lived very comfortably, trading mostly for vegetables, forest and stream tobacco, and money. "I spent a bunch of money on that trumpet," he thought, "and I doubt if I ever learned to play it." Nutbeam had been trying to play the trumpet for nearly 3 months and still couldn't blow a recognizable melody. At first, he couldn't even get a noise out of it, but now, after 3 months' practice, he was making more noise than he realized. He was making enough noise to send chills down the backs of everyone in Brennen Siding. Nutbeam always waited until nightfall to practice his trumpet playing. Somehow, playing in the dark seemed easier. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was his fear of being caught. He didn't know why, but he would die of embarrassment if anyone ever saw him playing an instrument. Nutbeam was very shy. "I'm nearly a mile into the woods. Surely nobody can hear me playing this far away. I might hear it, but I've got these big floppy ears. Nobody in Brennen Siding got big floppy ears." After 3 months, Nutbeam was convinced that nobody could hear the trumpet. Nutbeam underestimated the ears of Brennen Siding. When he felt it dark enough, Nutbeam went into his camp and fetched his trumpet. "Tonight I'll practice that Earl Mitten tune," he thought. "What's it called? Mouth of the Tobic?" When fishermen waded down the Totter Brook, they would not see Nutbeam's tiny camp embedded in the forested hillside 20 yards away, nor could the camp be seen from the bushy old truck road 100 yards to the south. If you were to stand 30 feet from the camp looking directly up at it, you might not see it, unless you knew it was there. Nutbeam had built 3/4 of the structure underground with the slant of the roof parallel with the hill. He built it down and into the hill like a mine shaft, so that he actually had to tunnel out a path to the door. All that could be seen from the front was a small door and 2 gray logs. Once a deer had actually walked on the roof. The tiny 7 by 10 foot square camp contained a table, 2 chairs, a cot to sleep in, a barrel stove, and 3 tiny kegs. In one keg he kept salty salmon, in another he kept salty gaspereau, and in a third, flour. There was a shelf on the eastern wall on which sat a can of tea, a can of forest and stream tobacco, a can of baking powder, 2 pipes, and a can of molasses. On another wall hung 2 rifles and a wrinkled, frameless picture of the Virgin Mary. On a nail beside the picture hung Nutbeam's rosary beads. On a wall beside the stove there were more shelves occupied by pots, tin plates, cups, a frying pan, a box of matches, knives, forks, spoons, and a tin can full of odds and ends. A pencil, a small magnifying glass, a ball of string, some fish hooks, one of a set of dice, which Nutbeam called a douse, a spool of thread, buttons, and a red squirrel's tail. Nothing hung haphazardly on all 4 walls. In a box in the corner he kept his traps, a revolver, ammunition, and his trumpet. There was no window in the camp, so that when he entered he either had to leave the door open so he could see, or light the lamp that sat on the table. The lamp was usually turned as low as linen tuckers. By the light of one tiny star, which shone through the open door, Nutbeam found his trumpet. He took the trumpet outside, put it to his lips, pointed the horn at the star-spangled sky, and blew. Honk, honk, beep, beep, barp, barp. The sound of the trumpet echoed from hill to hill, crossed brooks and rivers, and shot through windows and doors all over Brennen Siding. Nutbeam played, and he hoped sounded like "There's a Mansion in the Blue" for several minutes. Then the rifle shot went off, the retort slamming against his big floppy ear, startling him into a sudden silent trance, just a hair short of death. Darkness reigned supreme. Shadrack and Dryfly stood on the steps that scaled the east end abutment of the bridge. Panting heavily from running all the way from the forest to the river, Shadrack was particularly tired from carrying the heavy .303 rifle. Both boys were very happy to see the lit windows of the little settlement. The light of the river, calm, reflecting the starlit sky, restored their courage. The river, a symbol of home, strength, and identity, would give them courage for the rest of their lives. At the age of 11, they already loved it. During their lives, Shadrack and Dryfly would travel to Vancouver and New York, Toronto and Nashville, England and Italy, but their hearts would always remain at the Dungarvon, the Renouse, and the Miramichi. At the age of 70, they would still at times speak a little too fast and at other times a little too slow, and would repeat the word "and" too much. At the age of 70, they would still speak with a Miramichi accent, softly as the river people do, and refer to themselves as Dungarvon boys. "You gonna be able to go home by yourself, Dry?" asked Shadrack. "Yeah, I'll be all right. I have to sneak the rifle and flashlight back in. If I get caught doing it, I'll be killed." "Who do you suppose happened to do the whooper thing? Must have scared him, that's all." "Me and you scared the whooper, Shad." "Yeah, I know. Can't be nothing too dangerous if me and you scared it." "We gonna tell what we did? What do you think?" "I don't know. Maybe. What do you think it was, Dry?" "I don't know. Panther, I guess." "Well, we can talk about it tomorrow. I gotta get home and try get this rifle in the house without getting caught." "Okay, see you later, Shad." "Yeah, night." The boys separated. Dryfly's fear might have climaxed back in the woods, but its memory still shook him from within. What was more, he was still out in the dark night, and now he was alone. The boardwalk of the footbridge ribboned before him. The river swept below, another ribbon with its reflections of forest and sky. Reasoning told him not to be afraid of the bridge. It'll hold the devil, everyone always said, and he was accustomed to its bounce and squeaks. He had walked it many times, but in the daylight, always in the daylight. When he reached the middle abutment, it loomed dark and menacing beneath. He quickened his pace and hurried by. I wished I was more like Paladin, thought Dryfly. Pal's always out in the night, ain't scared a bit. How can Paladin do it? Can he not be scared? Scared of what? The dark? A ghost? Dryfly didn't know why he himself was afraid. Other people crossed the bridge and nothing happened to him, he reasoned. Why should anything happen to me? When he reached the west end abutment, he realized he was confronted with a decision. Cross the fields to the road, or go down along the shore to stand Tooney's brook and go up through the woods. He knew the path along the brook better, but the thought of walking through the woods did not appeal to him. He dismounted the abutment and headed across Dan Brennan's field, past the house, barn, and sheds. He came to the road. I made it the road, he whispered, and headed north toward home. He passed Billy Campbell's farm and Bernie Hanley's store. He was nearing the railroad crossing when the bird sang, the same bird he heard in the woods. Dryfly's heart leaped and began to drum in his chest. The hairs on his neck and back lifted, feeling like a chill. I'm getting out of here, he gasped, and ran as fast as he could all the way home. It would be many years before he'd be man enough to admit that he'd been so afraid of a bird. Shadrack climbed the hill toward home. His shoulder was sore from shooting the rifle, but he was not afraid of the devil himself. Shadrack had the rifle. Outside the house, he peeked in through the window. His father sat in the kitchen, reading the Family Herald. That was a good place for him. His mother was reading the Bible. Good enough, too. I'll sneak through the front door, thought Shadrack. I'll have to be quiet, though. Shadrack was just putting the rifle behind the chair when his father yelled, Where you been with that rifle? Bob Nash was standing in the living room door, slapping the palm of his hand with a tightly rolled Family Herald. Shad turned to face his father, knowing there was no escape, that a severe application of tightly rolled Family Herald was about to occur. I shot the Totter Brook Whooper, said Shad quickly. You what? I shot the Totter Brook Whooper. What? What did I hear you say? Bob Nash had already decided upon his course of action and hit Shadrack, hard as he could, on the butt, with the tightly rolled Family Herald. Don't, Dad, yelled Shadrack. Don't me. Whack went the Family Herald. Take my rifle, will ya? Whack. Young lad like you. Whack. Ouch, that hurts. Ouch, stop. Bob Nash had a terrible temper. Bob Nash had fire in his eyes. Bob Nash's fiery eyes could almost see the Family Herald's John Deere tractor ad imprinted in Shadrack's back. Whack went the Family Herald. Whack, whack, whack. Monday night in Bernie Hanley's store, Bob Nash took a drink of his Sussex ginger ale and said, Yes, sir, that boy of mine, that young Ramsey lad, Dryfly, took my rifle and went back in the woods alone, just the two of them, and scared the devil off. I haven't heard it since, have you? No, said Bert Totter. Didn't make a peep last night, far as I know. Heard the shot, so I did, yeah. Not a peep last night. Nope, heard the shot, so I did, said Lyndon Tucker. I wouldn't even have the nerve to do that myself, said Bob Nash proudly. Them boys got good stuff in 'em. I can say that, said John Caston. Did they see it, Bob? Asked Bernie Hanley from behind the counter. Sure they saw it. How would they fire at it if they didn't see it? Shad said it was big as a moose, and it had long horns like a cow. Said he saw his eyes shining as they were as big around as saucers. I heard the shot, so I did. Yeah. I did, yeah, commented Lyndon Tucker. Give me a new flashlight bulb, would you, Bernie? And a bag of peppermints for me young lad.